Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another GaudiMaspes22.com Podbean podcast and YouTube video. I am really pleased today to have a guest on whose works I have been reading for many, many years. In fact, one of his books I used in one of my classes at DeSales University many, many years ago. Half the students loved it, half the students hated it. The very, very progressive, liberal, secularized students hated it, and the more Catholic students actually loved it. And that book I'm talking about is The Tyranny of Liberalism, Understanding and Overcoming Administered Freedom, Inquisitorial Tolerance, and Equality. He's also had some other books, and the one we're going to be considering today, although I'm sure the tyranny of liberalism will come up. We're going to be discussing this book here. I'm going to hold it up. The Decomposition of Man, Identity, Technocracy, and the Church. So for those of you who are just listening and not watching, The Decomposition of Man, Identity, Technocracy, and the Church. It's not a huge book, maybe about 200 pages or so. I just finished reading it last night over a nice glass of bourbon. And so that's always a good way to finish a book when you're a little bit tipsy on bourbon, I think. It caused me to underline almost everything. So anyway, hey, James Kalb, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I'm joined by that maladroit misanthrope, my former colleague, Dr. Rodney Hauser of DeSales University. My listeners are used to having him join me on occasion, but I knew Rodney had been a fan of Mr. Kalb's writings for a very long time, and so I invited him to join us today. So I'm going to start with, the book, The Decomposition of Man. Extremely interesting book. It builds off of your previous works. Essentially, the book is, in a nutshell, and you can correct me if I'm right, it's essentially a book of anthropology. It's taking a good hard look at modern ideas about what it means to be a human being, and comparing and contrasting those with the sort of classical natural law understanding of what it means to be a human being, rounded out by Catholic revelation as to what it means to be a human being, and how, in many ways, modern secularity and its anthropology, especially in modern identity movements, is directly at odds. It's a meta narrative or a social imaginary that is directly at odds with the traditional sort of Catholic anthropology. So maybe you could just build on that, Mr. Kalb, and we can go on from there. Or if you wanted to add sort of what you think is important in the text.
Okay, sure. I guess one other thing the book covers is your modern methods of social organization, because obviously ideology, ways of thinking, methods of social organization, they all fit together. And recently I was studying Augusto del Noce, and he says,
yes,
I agreed with, but a great many things I agreed with, but one thing he said that I especially agreed with, that I've been thinking for some time, is that in current society, in secularized society, the Marxist account of ideology, that is, the dominant ideas, are explanations of why the people who run things should run things, and why everything else is nonsense, is true. Yeah. Because if you have something he doesn't say this, but my take on it is that yes, by society that is fully secularized, then everybody's just concerned with this worldly things, and it becomes a matter of getting your way, and so a matter of power. And so ideals and concepts of how things should be become maneuvers, and the people who are best suited to prevail in the resulting maneuvering are obviously the people who run things. And so that's what we see. And so one of the points of the book is that current ideology, wokeness, inclusiveness, the idea of free choice of an identity, is really another way of saying that billionaires and bureaucrats should run everything, because all other types of human social relations are really devalued, privatized. They shouldn't affect anything whatever. which just leaves money in bureaucratic organization. And so the people who are in control of those things end up running the whole show. And so that, an attempt to put things in different perspectives that might jog people out of the natural tendency, which is to accept the idea that it's all very soft and fuzzy and tolerant
Yeah.
and welcoming,
Yeah.
which may be the intention of a lot of people, but that's not the way it works. And I guess another thing is that I'd say about the book is that in addition to being anthropology, it's also conceptual analysis. Something like in the book on tyranny of liberalism, what does equal freedom actually mean? If you sort of work it out, what do those concepts imply? I wrote a book on inclusiveness. What does that really mean? It means that all traditional qualities and social relations have to become irrelevant. And here I deal with concepts of identity and whether to say that all these traditional ones are really nonsense, and what people make up, that's really what it is. And what really happens is that all those things become hobbies, and our identity is really our bureaucratic position, how much money we have, and whether we're right. We have the proper progressive attitude on the issues, so that it tries to step back and give people an external perspective from which they can look at what's going on. And so for some people that's very helpful. Other people think it's nonsense. So that's what
Yeah.
happens if you write something.
Yeah. And I guess since you bring it up, I'm going to plug your book on inclusiveness. It's called Against Inclusiveness: How the Diversity Regime is Flattening America and the West and What to Do About It. I do not have that book. I haven't read it. I've read this one, The Decomposition of Man, and I read The Tyranny of Liberalism, of course, because I taught it. So that's one now I have to add to my Amazon.com list to pick up as well, because it sounds really fascinating. I'm also very happy, as I was reading The Decomposition of Man, I'm glad you brought up Augusto Del Noce, because I'm a huge reader of his, fan of his. I've written on him. And I kept thinking there's a lot of crossover here between his analysis, his conceptual analysis, you put it, and that of Del Noce. I also couldn't help but think of, I did a lot of reading last year from the old guy, Ivan Illich, who's not much read by many people these days, but he had a lot to say about bureaucracy and rule by elites in a bureaucratic setup. And so I saw resonances there. So I would encourage the listeners to look into both of those thinkers. I would also like to mention, because I forgot, Mr. Kalb is a retired lawyer. And so, he's been down in the trenches, if you will, as a lawyer. And I know some other lawyers, and they tell me that the legal atmosphere and the legal profession these days is so secular, so woke, that it's a tough slog for any lawyer who doesn't sort of fit that bill, especially if you're going to some of the major law schools, Harvard, Yale, that kind of thing. Rodney, do you want to add in anything before I turn it back over to
Maybe a comment and a question, if I may. So I like. I'm also a big Del Noce fan. In fact, it's just a coincidence. I happened to be reading an essay of his last night from his book on secularism or secularity or whatever. I can't remember. It has secularity in the title. It's kind of a fascinating analysis of what he calls 19th century liberal morality, and then 20th century, what happens to in the 20th century. So, you kind of have a guy like Kant who tries to formalize ethics so that we can all agree on it, right? And he ends up with obviously what are pretty blatantly Christian ethics, but he pretends they're just secular. Yeah. But by the time you get to the 20th century, that is just everybody knows that that's not true, and so it has to be bleached even farther so that it's not, there's no connection to historic Christianity anymore. So there's kind of another phase of liberalism there that kind of takes a more strident turn, which I think we're dealing with, and it kind of helps me to sometimes understand why so many Catholics in the 50s, I think, got kind of duped into defending classical liberalism because they did seem to share a kind of common ethos with America at large, even Protestant America, et cetera, et cetera. They all kind of agreed that what a marriage was and what a guy and a girl were and those kind of things. So I wonder if you might comment about that. Like, how do you see that play? How did we get from 19th century Unitarian, broadly Christian ethic to this very different animal that we're dealing with today? And how do you see that?
Well, to me, that shows the development of absolutely fundamental concepts, the idea of equal freedom. And at first, what that meant is, well, you shouldn't have noblemen have more rights than everybody else.
Yeah.
And people ought to be able to enter businesses and buy and sell property, and you ought to have free markets. Because otherwise, you're granting privileges or patents to have some special status that lets you do things that other people won't.
Yeah.
And other things like equality before the law and some degree of representative government. You don't want these hereditary people to be making the laws, so it needs, in some sense, to represent the outlook of the people, and so therefore you need some sort of representation and parliaments and that sort of thing. So it starts off fairly modestly applied to a smallish aspect of life, and then it spreads because it's open-ended. I mean, equal is completely content-free, and freedom is content-free, and so it gets spread wider and wider. And like an obvious development was the progressives and then the New Deal. People don't have any money, aren't so free, and which is perfectly true, and they're certainly not equal. And so therefore, let's have economic equality and economic freedom in the sense that everybody has access to economic goods so he can live a decent life. And that got us into the 50s. And then things like the women's suffrage and the situation of Black people in America drew attention to other types of inequality where not only laws but social customs put people in an unequal position, and you made them not free to do things that other people were free to do. So the idea arose that, well, gee, I mean, we have to have some laws that do something about these social customs. The civil rights movement didn't stop short of dealing with state-mandated segregation, but also went after all sorts of private, voluntary relationships. And then once you start with that, you add more and more categories of social inequality, so that men aren't equal to women. We have to have feminism. We have to sort of reform thought. Also, people who have there are homosexuals who don't form bonds with people of the opposite sex. Well, they're not equal, so we got to do something about that. And then people who have other sexual confusions. So that in the end, every sort of traditional distinction that was basic to the functioning of traditional institutions like the family have to get abolished. And this is all part of the dynamic of open-ended freedom and equality. And of course, it also ties in with, as I mentioned, the interests of people who dominate the abstract, rationalized institutions like bureaucracy and global markets, because they end up being the only people with legitimate authority to make decisions and run things and say what's what. So that's the way I think it's developed. You have this. You start by abolishing any substantive idea of revelation, of the transcendent, of substantive natural law, even, and you get, and you don't have that. So what becomes the good? Well, the good is simply what people determine to be the good, and so the goal of politics becomes as open-ended freedom and equality so that they can all equally pursue their goods, but then there's no limit to what that demands. And in the end, it suppresses the actual goods that people care about, like community, marriage, family life, because those make demands on people other than the individual. And those are violations of those other people's freedom and equality.
Yeah.
So you end up with this incredibly self-destructive spiral in which freedom and equality lead to this horrible tyranny that destroys everything anybody ever cares about. And anyway, that's the grand dynamic that I see and that I try to trace in what I write.
Yeah, it's I was reminded, like I said, of Del Noce. There is an essay by his and the collection of essays called "The Crisis of Modernity," in which he says the dogma of modernity is as follows: we can no longer believe the following. Right? Yeah, and his point being that there is in its core in modernity a spirit of transgression to erase and annul everything that has come before, because those things create strictures on freedom, by creating communal identities that we want to dissolve. And so there's a quote at the very beginning of your book in the introduction, page 3. You say something, all of this has led to the suppression of principles that are as basic as the distinction between the sexes. Even a legal and philosophical concept like citizenship is suspect, since it has to do with particular connections and loyalties. There's the word I was looking for. The loyalties, the sort of, as the sociologist Peter Berger calls them, the various forms of loyalties that create our binding address in an existential sense. And I was reminded of all this too as I was watching the opening ceremony to the Olympics, and of course they played at some point that execrable song by John Lennon, "Imagine," which really is a religious hymn. It's a religious hymn. It's part of the hymn book of the religion of modern secularity, because in essence, what "Imagine," that song, is saying is exactly what you, in a sense, are pointing out in this quote, which is we cannot have harmony between peoples. We cannot have peace and so on unless we essentially dissolve everything that has traditionally bound us together: nation states, religion. Imagine there's no heaven, and so on. And so I think that's why that's become a kind of secular anthem, because it really does express this sort of globalist ethic that simply wants to dissolve all of these binding addresses, all of these loyalties.
Yeah, no, I'd say that's true. Yeah, I agree. It's a horrible hymn, and that is what it does express. It's this aspiration that people have come to see as a really wonderful goal. But if you actually live it, it turns out to be horrible, because you're nowhere, you're nothing. You're just an object for manipulation and use by whoever it is who has power. And so that a lot of what I try to do in these books is to point out the overall structure of social relations that all these ideas affect and what the actual consequences are. Just an aside on Del Noce. For me, it was really astounding reading him because he had a totally different background. He comes from this Hegelian background, this Italian idealism, and then he developed this very idiosyncratic way of dealing with that background, and sort of a semi-Thomist view of things, and so that but I agreed with them on almost everything, even though my background as an American and as somebody who did not have all of that was very, very different. So that was encouraging, because if you see the same thing from two very different perspectives, that's very helpful in persuading yourself that what you see is actually real. So I too would agree that everybody should read him.
I have a follow-up question. I have a follow-up question, if I may, about
Oh, sure. Go right ahead, Rodney.
about the relationship between the bureaucrats, the kind of people that are in power, that have all the money, but they also have a lot of influence in the realm of ideas. And it seems in some ways kind of strange that these people would push. I mean, in some sense, if you take the American divide between conservative and liberal, in many ways, these people are conservatives because they're capitalists. They don't want restrictions on, the way they run their businesses and things like that. So so on one hand, they would be probably sidle up to the Republican Party for various reasons. But then it is odd then that they also embrace this kind of radical leftist agenda, that the wokeness and all of that stuff. And I was just wondering if you could speak. Do you have a theory as to how that weird combination came to exist in these bureaucrats?
I think it's really solidified in 1990. It turned out that socialism didn't work. Because the bureaucratic impulse was always we should run everything because we're the experts, and all these other people, they just these partial views, and they're bigots or they're greedy or whatever, and we are the people who know and are disinterested, so therefore we should run everything.
Yeah.
And so that was the aspiration. It turned out that didn't work. They had to have markets, and on the bureaucratic side, or rather the billionaire side, of course, as Marx noted, to have close ties to the state and to have a state that wants to work with you and in fact is willing to advance your interest over against other social powers is a very nice thing. So that I think that's really the point at which the partnership, which has lots of tensions, as you point out. The partnership solidified, and of course the partnership, it's sort of bridged by the revolving door, by the fact that the bureaucrats are also tend to be personally avaricious, and so it's so it is nice to get like people like the Clintons became very rich. Bill would give a talk while the missus was Secretary of State, paid $500,000. And
Barack Obama became rich.
Yeah, he became rich. So that to some extent, it's a marriage of convenience. To some extent, it's a common outlook because, after all, business commerce is administered bureaucratically, and so there's common ways of looking at things. The government knows that they have to accommodate the concerns of people in business, and business knows that they have to accommodate the concerns of people in government, and they have a common language, common outlook for talking about that. And so it's a very interesting connection. And but again, I think it was 1990 that showed both sides that they really had to get on board with it, and they'd do a whole lot better. Both of them would do a whole lot better if they put their got behind it.
Following up on my earlier comment, you in that same introduction where I was talking about, you're talking about the dissolving of loyalties. You say it later on in that very same page, but of course, human beings cannot live that way, right? We can't live without these loyalties. So maybe you could comment on that. What dysfunction sets into society when we dissolve those loyalties? Because nature abhors a vacuum. So what's going to rush in to replace the old loyalties?
Well, different things. I mean, Charles Murray's what is it, Coming Apart or Falling Apart? His book discusses some of the consequences. If you're not one of the people for whom career is really a realistic aspiration or something that you do, then the destruction of loyalties relating to other things means that life goes downhill. you take drugs, you don't get married, you play video games, and you generally, the culture that you have no longer works, and this new yuppie culture doesn't work for you either. And on the, I guess we don't use the word yup anymore. I don't know what has replaced it, maybe. But on the careerist side, what replaces it is career. Career, being the right sort of person, which includes having the right political and social views, and then sort of the higher consumption. I mean, knowing all about craft beers or whatever, whatever trends in restaurants are currently going on. High-end travel, that sort of thing. You get prestige from that, and yeah. So, and of course, I mean that is all very well, but it's not really satisfying as a lifelong thing, and in the long run, it all ends in failure, right? I mean, everybody in his career ends up failing because you don't make the next level. I mean, you did well, but then you don't do quite as well. It's just not glorious triumph after glorious triumph. And on the consumption side, well, I mean, that isn't thrilling all your life. And so, their lives become worse too, but not in as obvious or fast a way. They have higher end distractions.
Yeah. I was, as well, it would seem to me that the dissolving of these traditional loyalties, family, nation, religion, linguistic group, ethnic group, whatever, these dissolved loyalties, and now we, as you correctly point out, you have a generation of libidinous pleasure addicts, video games, seeking the latest dopamine rush or whatever. It seems to me that this also downside of danger is it could lead to the apotheosis of politics. Politics narrowly defined as simply electoral processes. And is that kind of not what we see in the United States today, where every election has this messianic eschatological connotation almost? This, how many times in the past, in my entire lifetime, have I always heard this is the most momentous election in the modern history of America? This will decide the future. And then, nothing happened. I remember I was in London when Barack Obama was elected, and Londoners, figuring out I was an American, were slapping me on the back, and it was as if we had elected the Messiah. It was if Jesus Christ had returned and had become president of the United States. And then, then of course the president of Si Puede became just pretty much like any other president, and now retires to his mansion on beachfront in Hawaii. So, it seems to me that the reality of politics is not matched by the almost eschatological fervor that we inject into it now.
Well, yeah. There's there's okay. I think it will stop.
What? I don't hear anything.
Oh, okay. I guess the microphone is set properly. We have a really loud, telephone ringing, and an answering system is telling me that there's a crew to call us from. And so, but anyway, I'll to answer. Well, yeah. There's no transcendent meaning. It's all this worldly. But you need to have a general concept of the world, an idea of what makes the world what it is, and what that is politics. If there's something bad about the world, then man makes the world. It's all socially constructed, so therefore, politics does take on this eschatological character. It's sort of the locus of meaning. To do something good is to do something that is politically good, and which of course, and it needs to have drama. So you need to, and things don't in fact become wonderful after, say, Barack Obama gets elected. And so it should have become wonderful. Why doesn't it? Because there are these demonic forces.
Right.
So you tend to get this, and things don't happen as I expected. So therefore, the world is coming unglued because some real estate developer who had a game show won an election, and so that's the end of the world. And so there gets to be this enormous drama in sense that if we don't win, it's the end of the world. If we do win, it's this whole new Jerusalem, and obviously that's very damaging to sort of civic connection, and also since everything is you're always disappointed to
yes, that is key.
You're always disappointed to long-term satisfaction with your own society, to taking it seriously as something to which to give your loyalty. It promotes cynicism. And that's certainly a feature of our present time.
Right.
Absolutely. Rodney, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you if you would talk a little bit about the technocracy piece of the book. Give us your angle a little bit on the role of technology in the current scene.
Oh, okay, sure. One feature of current liberalism, inclusivist liberalism, woke liberalism, is that all this old-fashioned stuff and distinction shouldn't have any relation to what happens, and if somebody is inclined to take them somewhat seriously or give some weight to them, then that's hate.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's hate is because the only rational way to run things is through markets and the decisions of expert bureaucrats, because those are the ways that the various desires and aspirations of individuals that are the basis for what is good get aggregated and sorted out and advanced. So that, and of course, that rational process can be described as technocracy. You define your resources, you define what's wanted, and then you find rational ways to use the resources to get what's wanted. And that becomes the ideal, the only rational way, the only good way, the only supportable way to run society. And so that's the connection with technocracy. Technocracy springs from modern scientific thought, which leaves out notoriously leaves out forms and essences and final causes, and it just gives us resources and quantitative reasoning and means ends reasoning. And so that's what modern thought gives us. That's what the dominant institutions are comfortable with. And so that's technocracy, and it applies, among other things, as a moral thing, that other sorts of concerns are really just private tastes. That can be dealt with in the market or as personal hobbies, but should be regulated so that they don't infringe on somebody else. So that, for example, my attachment to the traditional family doesn't cause somebody else to suffer a disadvantage because he's not attached to the traditional family.
Yeah.
Keeping on that same theme, I'm glad Rodney raised it of technocracy, because I made some marginal notes and the thing. I mean, there is this thing, a lot of people have used this phrase, the technological imperative, which is what we have the power to do, we will do, we should do. And in one of the, I think one of the pushes behind the technological imperative isn't just something in the abstract. It also has to do with various Cold War realities, or the competition between the United States and, say, China, where the technological imperative kicks in, where the argument is raised, well, we have to weaponize space, or we have to develop various bizarre cybernetic interfaces with the human brain, because if we don't, the Chinese are going to do it. So somebody's going to do it somewhere. So once the technological genie is out of the bottle, we have to deal with it. So we better get out front of that. But there seems to be no concomitant, in a sense, equally forceful moral imperative to go with the technological imperative. It seems as if the more the technological imperative imposes itself, the less and less and less the moral and spiritual imperative has any role or anything to say at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, but certainly on the aspect of military power, that's recognized as amoral. So that to some extent, of course, technology is recognized as amoral, but in another aspect, that's considered good because it's neutral. It is multifacets. One advantage of looking to technology is that it's neutral between goals, and so that supposedly makes us equally free to search for our own bliss.
Yeah.
And that recognizes our dignity as as autonomous beings, and so it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But yes, as you say, it has a lot of different sides, and I'd mentioned that Robert Nisbet wrote a lot
Right.
about how the 20th century of war, what that did to advance the overgrowth of bureaucracy and other rationalized institutions, and the degradation, the disintegration of more traditional connections.
Yeah.
So that's a point that that's certainly a number of people have noticed.
There seems to be a connection here. Oh, sorry, Larry.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, and what you said before about the idea of freedom that prevails, and now this idea of technocracy that Larry was just saying, if we can do it, we ought to do it. It seems to me, has to do with getting rid of an objective standard, which kind of reduces all potencies to a point of act, right? So if you get rid of actuality and all you have is potency, this is exactly what's going to happen. Freedom just has to keep being. We have to emancipate people from yet another limit, because freedom is an end in itself. And then technology is no longer for something; it's for its own sake. It's just well, if we can do it, we have to do it. So and it's it's obvious that if we can do it, we should, because what's limiting? And this is why I think Larry is moral.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, because another aspect of technocracy is that it's supposed to liberate the subjective desires of the individual so that they can be realized. But of course, it also treats the individual as a means to an end. And so that's one reason I think people today are extremely uneasy. Either because man has become God, but man is always also like iron ore or coal or something. It's used for something. He gets put through a productive process for somebody else's purposes. So people are aware at some level of that conflict, and that's one reason why I think they're so sensitive to. Well, yeah, but that's one reason for the extreme fragility. That if what you are and what you aspire to is not socially validated, then the concern is that the aspect in which your subjectivity is really the law for all things will disappear, and you'll be stuck in the aspect in which your existence as an object of in this world means you're just a means to an end for other people. So there is that insecurity, that innate insecurity in how people relate to the current order, that I think is part of what leads to all this worry about safe spaces. The sort of hypertrophy of psychological safety as a goal.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because yeah, as the book says, identities become fragile and everything's become fragile, and then this other aspect that people have the two aspects. You're a deity because you create your own moral reality, but you're also a raw material.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that undercuts, to go back to once again to the technological imperative and the lack of a moral and spiritual imperative to go with it. Modernity simply, let's take global warming as an example here. Modernity simply does not equip us with a narrative, with an imaginative capacity, spiritual and moral imaginative capacity, to truly get at perhaps what the root of the problem is. Let's take, for the sake of argument, the fact that global warming is real and that it is largely man-made. I have no idea if any of that's true, but let's stipulate that because that's, yeah, it could very well be. It could very well be. It certainly couldn't hurt to reduce our CO2 emissions. And I'm a big environmentalist and I would be the first to say that. However, nobody wants to think that, my attitude is this: if global warming is caused by human beings, I think we're screwed, because the fact is, what's generating global warming is precisely the technocratic industrial society that we've created, that our entire world runs on fossil fuels and the economy run by fossil fuels, and our entire world is dominated by technology. And so now we have, for example, artificial intelligence now requiring the building of data centers that can handle the data loads for all of these AI program stuff. I read an article the other day that said that some of these data centers now require so much energy it's like CO2 on steroids being expelled in order to generate the electricity it's going to need. There's also, the fact that electric cars come with an environmental downside with the production of the batteries. The big wind turbines come with an environmental downside, and so there's this double-edged sword to we create the problem through technology, and then we double down on the problem by saying the solution must be technological, rather than maybe rethinking the entirety of how we've constructed our society from the ground up in terms of our patterns of consumption. Anyway, I'm kind of on a ramble here, but maybe you could comment on that.
Oh yeah. The problem is that your technological reasoning doesn't. It's hard to give it an overall perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You have to step back from it. It's because it has to do with solving particular problems, and you define the problem, and then you find a solution, and that makes it hard to the fact that it insists on focus and quantification means that it's really hard for it to look at overall systems. And you suppose, for example, we got a technological grip on CO2 production. Well, presumably, whatever system we set up to limit CO2 production would have other effects. And how can you know what those are? It'd have to be the sort of overarching system that dominates the world that presumably would have other effects, and that you wouldn't know about. And when they started appearing, people would deny that they're there because, after all, that would upset too many apple carts. And it's one reason. Technology is not good at social management. It's not good at tending a society. It's not good at common sense. Yeah. It's not good at stepping back and, as I said, saying what are we really doing here and what's going on, and so that I would agree. Technology focuses our approach to dealing with global warming as technological. And that means it's going to be something else in the environment in some sense, possibly social environment, possibly some physical environment that that's going to cause other problems. There doesn't seem to be any good way out of it, within the technological approach, unless somehow you can tame technology and put it with some non-technological philosophical approach, which, as I think you suggested, the demands of power of being able to beat China or whatever, make very difficult. So yeah, I mean, very bad things could happen. You can have collapses of the system. You can have all sorts of things. And the idea that we can get a grip on all that just is not very persuasive.
Yeah, I agree.
It reminds
Rodney?
me of somebody that Larry and I have a common affection for, is a guy named Ian McGilchrist. I don't know if you've heard of him, James, but he is is he a neuroscientist, Larry? I believe he's a neuroscientist.
Something among many other things. He's a neuroscientist.
He's a Renaissance man. I mean, he knows philosophy very well.
The main book being the Master and its Emissary. That's his classic work. But go ahead, Rodney.
Yeah. So he's basically said that since the Enlightenment, we have so fixated on one form of reason that we are really good at technical little problems right in front of us, et cetera, you know, yeah. But we are terrible at what you were just talking about. And sometimes he uses the word wisdom. We've gotten very good at technical know-how, but we've gotten very, very weak at wisdom. And it's precisely wisdom that kind of stands back and looks at the big picture. He has re-energized the two spheres of the brain thesis, which was debunked. It was debunked largely because a lot of it was bad pop psychology and pop science, but he actually does a very rigorous study of the two parts of the brain. And he thinks that it's very, very important that we don't only enhance or strengthen that one part that we've been fixating on since the Enlightenment. And the other one, the part that you talk about, common sense, big picture, that has been totally neglected. And it just reminds me of some of the things that he said when you just said it that way, that, you know, we have this technical know-how, but we don't have any wisdom or any big picture in which to figure out what we should do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're certainly not the first people who have commented on this issue. You know, it's hard because in public life, well, it's a technocratic approach. You say, well, we lack wisdom. Well, what do? You set up a department of wisdom.
Yeah.
You appoint wisdom scholars. You issue reports. It's not going to get you anywhere.
Right. I mean, we're getting rid of philosophy and theology departments at Catholic universities, right? I mean, because why would somebody waste their time, you know, thinking about big ideas, right?
Right. You know, it's hard to say within the context of public life today. You have to step back from it. But of course, you know, the more developed it gets, the more experts, you know, the more is done to get a grip on things like global warming, the harder it becomes. I think I do mention a few things like that in the book. For example, that the more scientists there are, the less fundamental progress you get because they get in each other's way. You know, just the consensus gets to be too strong. It has to go through too many people and too many committees and too many institutions, and so nothing ever happened. It freezes up. And yeah, that's certainly an issue. Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time in the book. In my other books, I think this book more than the others, you know, asking, well, what do you do about all this?
Yeah.
And, that's a good segue, because that's what I sort of want to move into next. I mean, we've been talking about, in a sense, the problem, you know, the classic problem of the atomized, modern, monadic individual who's defined simply as a neutral set of, you know, as freedom is defined in largely neutral categories, not oriented to any particular good. And the role, therefore, of modern society is to simply let individuals decide their own identities, and then to create laws that, you know, release those identities into the public, and to in a sense go after traditional loyalties that sort of impinge upon those identities and so forth. So, you know, that's a great deal of the book. But towards the end of the book, you start talking about solutions. Okay, it's all well and good. The diagnostics are good, but what's the prescription? What do we as Catholics or Christians do about this problem? And, you know, one of the things that interests me is your chapter on the church. You talk about tradition, and you have some very interesting comments to make about tradition, where you talk about tradition in of itself needs to point to something beyond itself. in order to be otherwise it simply descends into a kind of moribund reactionaryism or conservatism in a bad sense. And of course, then progressives rebel against it and so on. So maybe we could at least begin our because obviously, in some sense, what you're appealing to in terms of these binding loyalties and stuff, do the tradition plays a role in this. And so maybe you can comment on that.
Well, yeah, tradition has to do with the development of ways of life and ways of thinking and ways of understanding. Because we can't start from zero. If we start from zero, we have to experiment. We have to talk with everybody else, and eventually, by trial and error, some reasoning, some mistakes, we come to conclusions. And the conclusions that seem to work, they tend to strengthen. The ones that cause problems, they tend to drop out. So that tradition, in that sense, as the development of ways of doing things, is sort of a natural feature of human life. And obviously, in that process, you have to have some idea or some way of recognizing what it is that you're looking for. Tradition of music, gee, that's really wonderful music, and so doing the things that give you wonderful music, that's what you do and repeat and teach to others, and they develop. And if it works properly, you get something pretty good. So that and tradition is also a way of understanding general principles. You have a natural law principle like sexual binary. You can develop natural law support for the indissoluble marriage of husband and wife for having children and raising them. But in order for that to become a social reality, there's a lot of other things that have to be settled. For example, courtship. How do these how do boys and girls meet each other? How do they how does the establishment of a marital union, how does that come about practically? What's the guidance? What are the expectations? These will differ legitimately from time to time, place to place, so that you need tradition. Not only to understand things, but even when you have the general principle, you need tradition for that in order to make it a reality. You have it seems, I don't know if it's natural law exactly, but the sort of noblesse oblige. If human society, it has to have differences of authority and position, and the people at the top ought to be really conscious of their obligations and gratitude for their privileges, and how should we use these. And it needs a tradition of like being a gentleman or something like that.
Yeah.
To develop that, to tell them what they should do, what disgraces them. And so all features of human life need tradition for development. And that tradition always points to some further goal, which is sort of hard to grasp completely, but it through the tradition. So it's a difficult thing, because the goal is known through the tradition, but it's not it's not subsumed. It's not exhausted by the tradition. And then beyond that, you need some concept of something that is beyond all tradition and all human all human understandings, to serve as some final goal, some final anchor point, something that suggests that there are final standards that all this is oriented to, and that's where you get to religion.
Yeah.
And again, the same thing happens. You get to the idea of God. You can do that rationally, but what do you do about it? That this divine being that creates the world, that somehow wants the world to function in accordance with its design, to point toward the goods that are implicit in it. And what do you do about that? Since all that stuff is mostly beyond your comprehension. So you need religious tradition as well. And since human beings make mistakes, you need something to anchor all of this, which is revelation. There's sort of natural theology and seeds of the logos, but there's a limit to what that can do for you. So you need actual revelation, and then beyond that, you need some way of making sense of the revelation as a practical matter. So therefore, you need a church that is teaching authority. Anyway, that's the overall structure. That at every point of this ascent into a total understanding of the world, a way of life, that's a good, rewarding way of life. You need tradition. That's one of the features. You also need reason, natural law, like how can we see that the world works? And we also need faith, since we can't grasp all of it. So I don't know if that's really an answer.
Oh, it is. It is. It points to something very important. I mean, the sort of that runs through your book is, that we're only going to, in a sense, gain some traction in terms of changing things in our culture if other human beings outside the fold of the church actually start to believe what it is that we believe about what is most really real, most fundamentally real. And get actually Catholics in the church, the vast majority of whom tend to be somewhat lukewarm, to actually then take those claims also very seriously. Because the deal is this: one of the things that always interests me is, why is it that natural law arguments simply fall flat? Why don't they gain traction? Why don't they persuade? And you kind of hit it in the book, which is because natural law reasoning, in a sense, only makes sense where there's a certain faith and a fundamental transcendent order. In other words, even a highly nihilistic secularist can acknowledge that human nature evinces certain teleologies. But what they would reject is the normativity of those teleologies.
Yeah, they're oppressive. You got the feminists saying, well, like the female body is angled this way, and the male body is angled that way, and the various functions and the hormones and this, that, and the other make these patterns of behavior the natural one. But that means that nature is oppressive, and therefore our emphasis ought to be on defeating it and overcoming it. I ought to go out and get surgery and drug treatment so that I'm no longer dominated by my female body.
Yeah.
And so you need faith. There's something beyond it, that is an order that works for good.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, the good actually loses its force and its appeal. I think it was Hans Urs von Balthasar in Theological Aesthetics, right towards the very beginning. He says that syllogisms can still clatter away like, being churned out by rotary presses. And yet the goodness of the good has lost its flavor, has lost its appeal. We no longer seem to understand why it is actually that the good should be pursued. We can even recognize, I guess that's kind of good, but I feel no normative compunction to actually feel like it impinges upon me in any way, shape, or form. It's strange.
Yeah, I think who was it? John Lamont had something about the modern concept of the will. For Aquinas, the will is choose the good. The modern concept is the arbitrary will that chooses anything, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he says that causes all sorts of other problems, like like with respect to theories of authority and theories of obedience, but that's sort of a tangent. But there's sort of the absolute arbitrariness of the human will that people believe in today, and the liberal view is that's what makes us beings with dignity. Yeah. We just have this divine nature that by our arbitrary will we call moral reality into being.
Yeah.
And that leads us to certain conclusions about what we should be doing. Anyway, Rodney, you want to add something before I go on?
Oh, I was just thinking a little bit about all that stuff about tradition and stuff is so helpful. Already in the letter concerning toleration, John Locke, really gets us to think, I think, in a really bad way about what religion is. and because he privatizes it. It's about otherworldly matters solely. It's first and foremost an individual choice. And so already then you've gotten rid of any earthly mediation of this thing. It's I'll just up there here, and then I'm going to choose it, and then maybe I'll get together with some people who think like me, and we'll meet on Sundays. But but it's lost all of its all of what religion is, real religion is supposed to do, is precisely bring people together under common traditions and things like that. And it also does, exactly as you said, place something above the traditions themselves. Flannery O'Connor uses the expression mystery and manners. Manners are important, but if there's not a mystery that kind of grounds them, they can become, just they're self-referential or whatever. But an interesting thing that there's a cognitive scientist, or no, cognitive science named John Vervaeke, and he talks about Generation Z, which is the most religious generation we've ever had, and the most haven't been raised with the fewest restrictions on their freedom. So they're the ones who are more likely than any other generation to want to choose their sex and kind of all that stuff. And he says a lot of them are extremely anxious and depressed precisely because of this. Everything's up to them. So it puts them in this really bad place of anxiety. And sometimes when he's doing therapy, because he's also a psychologist, one of his experiments is to get them to play a video game. And they will sit there in his office and play a video game. And he says, it's interesting what a video game, why these kids are so addicted to video games, and why he sees this difference with them when they're playing it, is the video game provides for them everything that the modern world has taken away from them. Boundaries, an end, an objective end that can only be reached if you have certain virtues. And there are huge consequences if you get out of bounds. And then also he talks about the fact that in a video game, and I don't know this, going to play them, you can transcend yourself to another level of existence. If you get this world right, there's another world for you, right? And he says it's so interesting. They'll come into his office and there'll be an anxious mess. And then they get in the zone, he calls it, of the video game. And all of a sudden they're not anxious. They're experiencing this thing. And that's in a sense, what you're saying in your book is we've taken that world away from them. Yeah. And replaced it just with arbitrary human freedom and technology and bureaucracy. And then we expect people to thrive, right?
Yeah. But, one thing I'd add to that we all live in the reality-based community. And so that, you can talk about giving people meaning, but they have to believe it's real.
Yes.
That's why I tried to put it, because there's just a danger when you write these things about, we got these problems and what do we need? Well, we need God, so we got to stick God in the picture. But yeah, I mean, that doesn't do any good unless you actually think it's real, that's one of the basic problems with the John Locke view of religion that Larry was talking about. That in that view, God is not a basic constituent of reality.
Right.
You have to understand God is a basic constituent of the reality. You have to understand natural law is actually real, such that, I am a man, and that does make some differences. And I'm married, and I can't decide to get unmarried, and that does mean something about what I should be doing. And if I don't do those things, then I'm denying what I am. I'm turning against what I am. I'm betraying myself. So that I don't know. It's hard to they fall back into other ways of speaking. I think there's somebody who said in acting, if you can get sincerity, you can get everything. But something. So I mean, something like that is actually true. That has to be actual acceptance that stuff is real, and that's the world that actually exists. And so then, once you do that, things can go in a better direction. But until that happens, they can't.
Why I think it's really important. I know Rodney just sent to me an article that he wrote that's hopefully going to be published soon on the modern Catholic University. I think one of the greatest tragedies in the history of the modern Catholic Church is that in the Western world, mainly Europe and North America, is the complete degradation of Catholic universities. Because in order to get people to see that God and Christ and so forth are constitutively real, real in a foundational way that matters, is it's not good enough to simply have sort of decent theologians in your theology department and to atomize our whole evangelizing efforts, if you want to, changing culture in, well, we just need better theology. We need better, when in point of fact, we need the complete reconstruction and rejuvenation from the ground up, inside out, of various other academic disciplines who we turn to help us define the real, so that you have Catholics with imagination who are economists, Catholics with imaginations who are psychologists. You get my drift,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you see the reformation of the disciplines that can then go out. I think it's one of the interesting things, for example, why Jordan Peterson is so popular among conservatives, even though he's not a Christian and he's got opinions that I completely disagree with, but he's got a certain spark. He's got a different way of viewing human psychology that runs contrary to everything in the modern world. We need sort of Catholic Jordan Petersons and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I make some arguments in the book. You have to turn people's heads around.
That's right. You do say that towards the end.
Yeah, there's absolutely basic issues, and they have to keep on harping with them. So people get used to what we're saying, and eventually some of them will catch on. This way of looking at things that doesn't fit in. You can't have a department of theology that's a department, and then there's a department of I don't know, biology and a department of something else, because theology is basic. It's, as you say, it's fundamental to the nature of the world, and so that everything in the world has to be understood by reference to its basic reality of the world, and the basic reality is God.
And it is possible, Rodney knows this story. There was a political scientist who taught at DeSales University, our university, for many, many years, a very good teacher, a much beloved colleague, Dr. Sam Martineau, a complete agnostic, secular, the whole, everything, who, when he retired, he stood up on the floor of the faculty, or I guess, Rodney, can correct me, right? And he was recounting the fact that one of the things he's going to miss is the intellectual discourse with his colleagues. And then he specifically mentioned a series of conversations that he had had with Rodney and me about separation of church and state, and so it had to do with the Obamacare sort of contraceptive mandate or something or other. And he said it was genuinely one of the most enjoyable intellectual conversations he had in his 30 years at the university. And I don't point that at to toot our horn, but to point out that persuasion is possible. And so go ahead.
Oh, no, I agree. Persuasion is possible. Some people are actually interested. Nobody fully believes falsehood. It's hard fully to believe a completely incomplete understanding of the world, because you're aware on some level that something's being left out. And so that clarity is important. Trying to figure out what's going wrong so that people aren't seeing this issue is important. But something like the search for common ground is not where it's at, because it's the ground that is not common. That's what the world needs, and what Catholics should be able to contribute. So that anyway, that's a nice story, because now who was it? Was it which atheist philosopher was it who said, "Well, gee, I'd never really read the Aristotelian arguments, or the Aquinas arguments by Aquinas closely, and actually they're a whole lot better than I thought they were."
Yeah. Point said we go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So that is impossible. That is possible, and it's and it is worth thought. How you can get around a complete failure to see that something's an issue, which is a lot of it.
And it's a very, very important, because we can get locked into a mentality of defeatism, locked into a mentality where the social imaginary of secular modernity, technocratic modernity, is so hegemonic that we can start to despair, and then we start thinking too abstractly. And everybody who thinks within that social imaginary, we then tend to demonize as a lost cause. And yet the fact is, the supernatural and God are the constitutive reality of existence.
Yeah.
Common sense will, and the vast majority of secular thinkers out there are more like our friend Sam Martineau than they are like a Richard Dawkins or something like that. They're open to persuasion. They're open to friendship. Intellectual friendship is what I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah, that at least you can see that there's an issue there.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, we have another
yeah,
friend, a psychologist, Dr. Richard Knoll, who teaches at DeSales. Very famous psychologist, actually, agnostic and so on. Yet he loves chatting with us because he's open. All right, he's not closed. He's open.
yeah, there is an issue there that maybe something's being missed. Yet to my mind, that's most of the struggle. Because then you can start talking about things. The problem is that the nature of public discussion, specialization means that it's very hard. On some level, everybody's aware of everything, because they're human beings, they're living lives and doing and suffering the things that people do and suffer. And so that all the considerations that affect human beings affect them, and people pick up on things. And how do you point that out to them? I mean, there's all these expressions like thematize and
Yes,
so,
thematize.
how do you do that? I mean, how do you?
Yeah. Rodney, I want to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, James.
I've had it enough, but hey, let's hear from Nate.
Well, Rodney, you have something you want to add? Because we're running out of time, kind of, and I have one last thing I want to turn to. But Rodney, I'll let you get a word in edgewise here.
No, I'm good. I feel like I've said what I wanted to say. So go ahead and.
All right. Well, in chapter 18 of the book, it's titled "Objections." You say, Mr. Kalb, some objections are mostly a matter of semantics. The idea of a distinct Christian community is now associated with the phrase Benedict option. Benedict sounds antiquarian, option sounds like optional, and the phrase as a whole suggests that we are all going to head for the hills. Rod Dreher, who invented the expression, is also known for the phrase crunchy conservatism, which sounds like a post-hippie lifestyle choice for snotty rightists. Put it all together, and it sounds to many people, rightly or not, like a self-indulgent escapist fantasy for bored middle-class people who do not want to deal with things they do not like to think about. And by the way, to those listening, this is an example of just the sheer genius of the writing in this book. It is captivating writing. It's like stepping into a fast-moving stream, and the writing just keeps pushing you along. What a brilliant way to put it. Now, I actually have conversed with Roger, and I kind of like Rod, but I know exactly what you're talking about. So as we end, we're talking about what can Christians do to counteract this, and you talk about the importance of a monastic ideal in the book as really, really important, and yet you're kind of critical here somewhat of Rod Dreher. So maybe you could begin with the Dreher critique and then move on to what you think is a proper kind of Benedictine monastic sort of solution, not solution, but you know what I mean?
Okay, it wasn't exactly a critique of Rod Dreher, but it's just this difficulty. I mean, we live in this prosperous consumer society where people read these books are mostly very comfortable, and so everything does tend to slide into like a consumption choice, and that's an issue because the Benedict option or the doing something to totally transform everybody's consciousness is not obviously not a lifestyle choice or something to play around with. And how do we get past that? How do we get serious? How do we get real? So that was really the issue I was pointing to.
Okay.
I was giving an account more of
well, how people perceive it.
A fairly understandable reaction to the book in today's setting.
Well, I know Rod Dreher is always complaining that people misunderstand his book as a "let's all flee to the hills" kind of mandate, and he's not saying, "Hey, let's everybody flee to the hills." So yeah, I took your criticism there simply to be this is how many secularists, if you will, would look at his Benedict. But talk then about why you think monasticism is so important in the life of the church.
well, that's one of the reasons is that what you need to have. Well, we are all members of each other, and so one thing that's terribly important is for within the church to be the feeling that finding God, giving up everything for the sake of God, that God is real, God is constitutive, so that finding God is of absolutely fundamental importance, the most important thing in the world. But for most people, there are lots of distractions. And so I think it's very important for some people. And here I'm on the general staff and saying that, well, gee, we need some shock troops
Yes.
So people, obviously, people can complain about all of us and with a lot of justice. But anyway, for there be people who actually do act like the Desert Fathers, or do act like Benedict, or and really do give their all in a way that can't be misinterpreted as something else. And so that was why it's like pure research. You can't have a scientific community that does lots of technology and applied scientists by itself. You also need some people who are doing pure research into fundamental scientific issues. Because those really have to be the reference point. And so you need heroes of the faith in all sorts of directions, and we need saints in all sorts of directions. And certainly one of the directions that's very important in a non-serious time like our own is people who are very serious about finding what we've all forgotten, which is God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm reminded of I've mentioned this before, one of my favorite movies. It's an old movie, Das Boot. It's a German movie about a U-boat. U-boat. And of course, they go through all sorts of travails. And at one point, it looks like the boat is going to be stuck on the bottom of the ocean. But through the heroics of his crew, the captain realizes at some point that the boat has been saved. The submarine has been saved. And he's, with tears on his eyes, he lowers his head and he says under his breath, Gute Leute muss man haben. Gute Leute.
Yeah.
It boils down, the whole movie boiled down to heroism. You have to have good people. You can't have heroics without heroes. And the church right now lacks heroes, it seems. I mean, and yet we seem to be chasing at, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of synodality and all that sort of stuff, but it seems to be we're chasing after the latest boutique issue, the latest idea, the latest trend, the latest accommodation. Is we have to accompany everything, which means dissolving our own most special identity. But that's not a breeding ground for heroes, is it? Or saints?
No. I mean, all getting together and chatting, and I mean, that's not Benedict did. He went on and find God. It's not really what Francis did. Saint Francis, he said, well, Jesus did this, I got to do that. It's simple devotion to God, is something that, again, one of the themes of my book is that, well, at every stage of the development of a good way of life, you need something beyond it. And so you need people who are directly devoted, passionate, devoted, with utter seriousness devoted to the thing that is beyond everything. And that was my intent.
Absolutely.
Obviously, to say that is to show that I am not a hero. I'm saying other people ought to be. That is a problem. That is a problem.
Yeah. And was it Flannery O'Connor said, I think I could be a martyr so long as they killed me quickly?
I hope I can come up to that level.
Rod, do you have any last words? We need to wind this down. We've been at it now almost an hour and a half or so. Any last question or words, Rodney?
No, just very much appreciate the shout out to monasticism. Our late friend David L. Schindler was always saying the same thing, that the monastery was the high point of the medieval city for a reason. And the lack of that centrality of monasticism in society has really wreaked havoc, because, as you put it, there's nobody out there focusing on what is most important.
Yeah.
What's that going to do with the rest of us? You know, it's yeah. So I think that's a brilliant thing to bring in at the end there.
Worse. It seems as if now we're being told by our betters in the church, betters in quotes, that the pursuit of that kind of excellence is to be discouraged in some sense, as in some ways indietrist, backwardist, that kind of thing. Forward, ever forward. I don't know. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, as I said, but anyway, there does seem to be a resistance within the church to precisely that kind of heroism, that kind of excellence. But anyway, James, do you have any last words before we sign off here?
It's been a good discussion, and yeah, I mean and I hope I hope some of the people watching get something out of it. I mean, you never know. But anyway, thank you for having me on, and glad to meet both of you.
And thank you for being here. And you are right. You never know. You should see my email inbox. People comment. People, there are, you know, lots of people watch these videos, listen to the podcasts, and I get emails all the time, and from the most places you wouldn't predict, about videos that I thought fell flat, and they thought, oh, that was your greatest one yet. So yeah, people do listen, and so and you have a lot to say, James Kalb, and I hope everybody runs out and buys your books, because you have a good voice and it needs to be heard. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.